All right, welcome to another deep dive. You know how this works, right? You send us the sources, we roll up our sleeves, and we dig in.
Exactly. We try to pull out those really interesting bits, the stuff that makes you think.
Right. Today's deep dive. Well, you guys sent in some excerpts from Art Therapy for Groups, a handbook of themes and
Oh,
exercises.
that's interesting.
Oh, it is. And what we're really going to focus on is how art can be this powerful, like therapeutic tool, especially when you're working with a group. We'll uncover some of the practical techniques and maybe even a few things that'll surprise you, especially if you're into like how groups function, the whole creative process, or therapy in general.
It's amazing, isn't it, how art can connect with people on such a deep level, especially when they're sharing that experience with others.
It really is. So this handbook, it really gets into the nuts and bolts of why art works so well in groups. It all started actually as a way for the author to kind of collect all the different approaches used by art therapists and, group leaders in general.
Right. It's like a compilation of best practices, sort of.
Yeah, exactly. Initially, it was aimed at people who were already working in the field. It grew out of the author's research and even from an earlier handbook way back in 1982 that was used for like a survey they did.
Oh, interesting. So it has quite a history.
It does, it does. But then something interesting happened. It didn't stay just about art therapists, did it?
No, it definitely expanded beyond that.
Yeah.
The author started noticing a growing interest from all sorts of professions, like occupational therapists, social workers, teachers, you name it.
Wow.
Even people involved in community work were getting curious. It became clear that the principles in the book weren't limited to just art experts. They had a much broader application.
Makes sense. A lot of these principles are about understanding people and how they interact.
Exactly. And that's why the handbook evolved. It started including more guidance on actually running groups and how to adapt activities for different needs, along with this updated collection of themes.
So it really became a resource for anyone working with groups in a creative way. Now, here's something I found really interesting. The book actually emphasizes co-leadership. It even goes as far as suggesting that leaders should try participating in the art making themselves, like as part of the group. Why do you think that is?
Well, co-leadership is great for a few reasons.
Mm-hmm.
If you're new to facilitating a group, it's such a valuable way to learn from someone more experienced, right?
Sure.
To bounce ideas off of each other.
Right.
And then, you can really dissect what happened to the group afterward.
Yeah.
But this idea of leaders actually doing the art themselves,
Right.
that's about building empathy, truly understanding the participant's experience.
Because you can't really lead someone through something you haven't done yourself, right?
Right, you might miss those subtle things like that initial hesitation someone might feel, or the frustration of getting stuck, or even how people interpret the creative process differently. By actually doing the art, leaders can offer much better, more grounded support.
I like that. More grounded support. I can see how that would be so important. Okay, so let's take a step back for a second. For someone who might be thinking, oh, okay, group therapy, why would I choose that over individual therapy?
Good question.
Hmm.
The handbook actually outlines a bunch of advantages to group work.
I bet.
One of the biggest is social learning.
Right.
Groups provide this really natural setting
Hmm.
to practice, how we interact with each other.
It's like a real world simulation.
Exactly. Then there's mutual support, which is huge.
Right.
When people share similar experiences, they can offer a type of support and encouragement that you just can't get anywhere else.
I can imagine.
And it leads to really unique problem solving too.
And there's also that thing where, like, other people in the group can give you feedback.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And that can give you totally fresh perspectives on things you might not be able to see yourself.
Because we're often blind to our own,
Blind spot.
exactly, blind
Yeah.
spots.
And for some people, groups can be a less intense environment to explore, new ways of being or even discover hidden talents.
That makes sense.
And let's not forget the practical side too. Group work can be a more democratic and efficient way to get guidance from an expert.
True.
And a lot of therapists actually find group work incredibly satisfying. The dynamics are just so unique.
So it's not just about efficiency, it's also about that unique group experience that offers its own benefits. Now, if we zero in on art therapy groups specifically, what are art therapists usually aiming for? What are their goals?
So the therapists surveyed basically identified two main clusters of goals,
Hmm.
personal and social.
Okay.
On the personal side, it's about things like sparking creativity and that spontaneous energy.
Right.
Also, building self-confidence and feeling validated, fostering independence, encouraging people to experiment and make their own choices, and of course, providing a way to express feelings and those sometimes unconscious thoughts and emotions, but without having to rely on words. It's also about increasing self-awareness and gaining insight, helping people make sense of their experiences, and offering a space for relaxation.
So it's really holistic, hitting all these different levels of personal growth. What about the social goals?
Well, on the social side, they want to encourage empathy and understanding between group members,
Right.
promote teamwork and engagement, improve communication skills, and make it easier for people to share their challenges and insights. It's also about helping people see that, we all share common human experiences, but at the same time, everyone's individual journey is unique.
Right. We're all in this together, but our paths look different.
Exactly. And art therapy groups can help strengthen those connections between people, build trust, and create that sense of belonging within the group.
It sounds like it creates a safe space to really explore relationships and how we interact with each other.
Exactly. And it also provides a setting where the group can examine how it functions as a whole.
So it's not just about individual growth, it's about understanding the group dynamic itself. Now, what I find really fascinating is how these goals actually link up with bigger theories about how group therapy works. The book specifically mentions something called Yalom's curative factors.
Oh, yes. Yalom's work is really foundational in the field.
And the author of the handbook draws some pretty clear parallels between what art therapists are trying to do and those curative factors that Yalom identified. Can you remind us what some of those factors are?
Sure. So there's instilling hope, which is so important in any therapeutic setting.
Of course.
There's the realization that, hey, you're not alone in your struggles, this universality. Sharing information is also a big one. Altruism, the chance to give back to others, and even re-experiencing family dynamics, but in a way that allows for healing and growth.
So it's not just about rehashing old wounds, it's about working through them in a new context.
Exactly. And then there's developing social skills, learning through observation and imitation, and of course, building that sense of cohesiveness within the group. Yellum also talks about catharsis, that emotional release that can be so powerful, and even grappling with existential questions about life and meaning.
And all of these, resonate with the goals of art therapy groups. It's really cool how they align. Okay, so we've got these general advantages of working in a group, and we've got the specific goals that art therapists have. But why art? What makes art such a powerful tool, especially in this context?
Okay, so this is where things get really exciting. First of all, art is inherently inclusive. It allows everyone to participate on their own level. It doesn't matter if you create a super detailed masterpiece or just make a few simple marks on the page. The act of creation itself, the contribution, it all holds equal value.
So it's not about being like a good artist.
Not at all. It's about the process, the
Yeah.
expression. It's accessible to everyone, regardless of their perceived artistic skills.
Mhm.
And secondly, and this is really crucial, art provides this amazing nonverbal pathway for communication,
Right.
especially when words just aren't enough, or maybe they just don't come easily.
Because sometimes you can't articulate what you're feeling, but you can draw it or paint it or sculpt it.
Exactly. A visual image can capture so many facets of an experience all at once.
It can be so much richer than words sometimes.
Right. It goes beyond the limitations of language.
Now, the handbook talks about structured art therapy groups. What does that actually mean, and how's it different from those sessions where it's more free-flowing?
So, in a structured group, the session is built around a shared task or theme. Everyone's working with the same starting point.
Okay.
It's different from those unstructured sessions where people might be working on their own projects, kind of independently. But it's not like a black and white thing.
Right.
Groups might use structured activities sometimes, and then have other times where it's more open and free-flowing.
So it can be a mix. What kind of structure are we talking about, though? Is it super rigid?
Not necessarily. It really depends. It could be something as simple as a basic guideline, like you can paint whatever you want, but you can only use these 3 colors.
Okay.
Or it could be a more specific instruction like have a conversation with the person next to you, but you could only use crayons and no talking aloud.
Oh, wow. That's a challenge.
It is, and it can be really interesting to see how people navigate it. So you see, it runs the gamut from those open-ended suggestions to pretty specific activities.
So why even use themes at all? Why not just let everyone create whatever they feel like in the moment?
Well, themes can do a lot of really important things. For starters, they can help people feel less anxious,
Yeah.
especially if it's a new group. It
Yeah.
gives them a starting point, something to work with, so they don't feel that pressure of a blank canvas.
Yeah, that can be paralyzing sometimes.
Exactly. Themes are also great when you're working with limited time, like those one-day workshops or maybe in a hospital setting where someone stays short.
Sure.
It helps the group focus their energy and get to those deeper, meaningful things more quickly. And when everyone's working with a common theme, it can really foster a sense of connection and purpose within the group.
It's like a shared experience.
Right. And themes are super flexible because they can be interpreted in so many different ways. That means each person can engage with the theme in a way that's personal to them and meets their individual needs. It can also encourage interactions between people, spark conversations and reflections.
That makes sense.
And sometimes the theme can help people break free from those ingrained patterns of thinking and feeling, those ruts that we all get stuck in sometimes.
So it's like a gentle nudge in a new direction.
Exactly. But there are potential downsides too, right?
Right. The handbook mentions those.
Using themes well is a bit of an art in itself. It takes some careful thought.
What can go wrong?
Well, if you choose a theme that's not a good fit, you might accidentally bring up emotions that the group's just not ready to deal with.
Yeah.
You know?
Ooh, that could be intense.
Yeah, it could be overwhelming. Or, on the flip side, if the theme is too vague or superficial, you might end up with a really shallow experience where people don't feel like they've gotten anything meaningful out of it.
So it's about finding that balance.
Exactly. That sweet spot where the activity is engaging but also has the potential to lead to some real exploration and growth.
Now, the handbook also talks about something that sounds really interesting. The element of play in art therapy. How does play fit into this whole therapeutic process?
Play is so important. The author mentions Piaget's stages of play, which are really interesting, but the main focus is on cultivating that attitude of playfulness.
Okay.
Approaching things with a sense of joy, letting go of those external goals, and just being in the moment, spontaneous and engaged. It's about doing something for the pure enjoyment of it, even if there are some serious things going on underneath.
So it's not about being frivolous. It's about tapping into a different way of being, a different energy.
Exactly. And that's so important in therapy because it can help people access things that might be too painful to confront directly.
Why is that sense of playfulness so important in this context?
Well, play is super connected to learning and development, especially for kids, right?
Of course.
It's how they learn language, cognitive skills, social roles.
Makes sense.
But for everyone, regardless of age, play creates this safe space to kind of rehearse difficult situations or conflicts, to experiment, and maybe even find some resolution without having to deal with real-world consequences.
I like that. It's like a dress rehearsal for life.
Yeah. And by representing those challenging experiences in a playful way, maybe even changing the outcome within that play, it can help people gain new perspectives and feel more empowered to deal with those things in their own lives.
So it's a way to process things without feeling overwhelmed. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the practical side of actually running a group. What are some of the first things a leader needs to think about?
Well, if you're organizing a community workshop, for example, the way you publicize it is really important.
Right.
You want to be thoughtful about how you describe the group so you attract the right people, the ones who would actually benefit from it.
Right, so you're not setting up false expectations.
Exactly. You also want to manage expectations for those who might not be a good fit for the group. Giving people enough time to sign up and being upfront about any costs involved, those are important too.
Of course.
And then there are the practicalities of the space itself. Where's the group going to meet?
The environment.
Exactly. The environment can really influence the group dynamics, so you want to choose a space that feels safe and comfortable for everyone.
And then what about the actual structure of the sessions? What kinds of decisions does a leader have to make beforehand?
Lots of decisions.
I bet.
One big one is whether or not people are allowed to talk during the art-making part.
Interesting.
That can really change the whole feel of the experience, whether it's more internal and focused or more interactive. And things like breaks, how those are handled. Will the leader be participating in the art activities alongside the group? What about group responsibility?
Like cleaning up or setting up.
Exactly. It's also important to be clear about how long the sessions will be and whether people are expected to be there for the whole time.
Boundaries.
Boundaries, yeah. Now, the handbook outlines a typical session structure, which can be helpful.
Yeah. What's that look like?
Usually you start with an introduction and a warm-up activity, which could be anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes. Then comes the main art-making activity, which usually takes about 20 to 45 minutes. And then you wrap up with a discussion and a closing, which could also be around 30 to 45 minutes.
Okay.
Of course, you can adjust the timings depending on the overall length of the session, especially in those community or professional settings.
Right.
It's really flexible. But one thing that's super clear from the handbook is that the focus isn't on creating like a perfect work of art.
Right, it's more about the process than the product.
Exactly. It's about the experience of creating, not the aesthetic quality of what you end up with.
Yeah.
The book really emphasizes that. It encourages spontaneity, that childlike freedom of just expressing yourself,
I like that.
just exploring the materials, using art as your own language for your feelings, and just accepting all forms of expression. There's no right or wrong way to do it.
That's refreshing.
It is. Even scribbles, even just random marks, those are valuable.
It's about letting go of judgment.
Yes. The goal is to relax and engage with the materials in a way that feels authentic to you.
So how does a session actually get started? Can you give us some examples of those warm-up activities?
Sure, warm-up activities, especially with painting, can be really simple.
Hmm.
One example is just passing a single piece of paper around the group, and everyone add a mark or a line to it before passing it on.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's fun. Another one is to do a quick drawing exercise where everyone sketches whatever's on their mind at that moment. Or you can have people introduce themselves to the group through a picture, not a visual introduction. The handbook has a ton of suggestions for warm-ups in Part 2, Section B.
We'll have to check that out.
Yeah, and it points out that a lot of the main themes can also be adapted for those shorter warm-up exercises.
That's a good tip. What about those groups that have been meeting for a while, though? Do they still need to do those formal warm-ups every time?
Not necessarily. Once people know each other and are comfortable with the process, you might not need those elaborate warm-ups.
Okay.
You could just do a quick check-in or have a short chat about the day's theme before jumping into the art making.
Right.
But if you've got new members joining, it's always good to, explain how the group works, any agreements you've made. And even long-standing groups can benefit from revisiting their ground rules every once in a while, just to make sure everyone's still on the same page.
Makes sense. Choosing the right activity or theme seems pretty crucial.
It is.
What are some key things to consider, especially when you're thinking about groups that meet regularly versus those one-time sessions?
So for groups that meet regularly, it's often good to start with more general themes,
Okay.
Things that help people get to know each other and explore their initial concerns at their own pace.
Gently easing in.
Exactly. Some good starting points might be just playing around with different art materials, those picture-based introductions, or maybe drawing lifelines to represent their personal journeys, or even focusing on current feelings and what's on their mind. The main goal at the beginning is to just encourage participation and be sensitive to everyone's needs. There's no one-size-fits-all approach, though.
Of course not.
It really depends on the leader, the specific group, and the resources you have available.
Makes sense. What about those one-time session, like a single-day workshop?
For those, the theme has to be really tightly connected to the goals of that specific session.
Because you got limited time.
Right. For example, if you're doing a training workshop for people who work with kids, you might start with a collaborative mural to encourage teamwork, and then have them do individual drawings on the theme of My Family Tree to get them thinking about family dynamics from a child's perspective.
Oh, that's a good one.
The theme needs to support the learning objectives of that particular session.
Now, the handbook lists a bunch of factors that can influence how a session goes. It sounds pretty complex.
Oh, it is. It's a whole interplay of different things.
Like what?
Well, the physical environment where you're meeting, the specific characteristics of the group members, what stage of development the group is at, the mood that day, what people are concerned about. The overall focus of the group matters too, whether it's more art-centered or more social.
Right.
And of course, the leader's style plays a huge role, as well as the theme or activity you choose and how you guide the discussion afterwards.
So many moving parts.
Yeah, but the main takeaway is that you should always choose the theme thoughtfully and make sure it's relevant to the group and what's going on for them at that time.
So it's a dynamic process.
Absolutely. It's all about responding to what's happening in the moment.
Okay, so once the art activity is in full swing, what's the leader's role? Is it mainly just to observe?
Observation is a big part of it, for sure.
What are you looking for?
By watching how people engage with the materials, you can get a lot of insights. Where do they put their energy? Where do they seem hesitant or uncertain? Do they pause and reflect a lot?
Right.
All of those little things tell you something about their process. If you're not actively participating in the art yourself as the leader, it's really valuable to just take some time to observe.
Makes sense. And then comes the discussion part.
Yes.
What are some important things to keep in mind for that part?
Well, the physical setup for the discussion is important. Ideally, Everyone should be able to see the artworks that's being talked about. And it's good if people can make eye contact with each other.
Right.
It helps build those connections and encourages people to participate. So that might mean staying where you are, or if you did a group project, maybe gathering around that. Or you could even move to a different space. Maybe arrange yourselves in a circle with the artwork displayed in the middle. As the leader, your role is to facilitate the discussion.
Right.
So you want to make sure everyone feels comfortable sharing. Instead of just responding to individual comments, you can ask questions to the group as a whole, encourage that back and forth.
To get everyone involved. Now, the handbook mentions different ways to approach interpreting the artwork, which seems tricky.
Interpretation is definitely a delicate area.
Right.
Some groups operate within a specific theoretical framework, like psychoanalysis, which takes a lot of training and expertise to do properly.
Because you're looking for symbolic meaning and all of that.
Exactly. But a lot of groups, especially those in community settings, might use a broader approach. They might not be adhering to one specific therapeutic model.
Okay.
In those cases, the most important thing to remember is that the person who made the art is the ultimate authority on what it means.
Of course.
Any interpretations you offer should be suggestions, not pronouncements,
So it's more like you're offering possibilities, not definitive answers.
Right. And it's super important to be respectful of where the person is at, whether they're ready to hear certain things or not. A skilled leader can help someone explore their own artwork and come to their own insights without imposing any external meanings.
It's about guiding, not dictating.
Exactly.
Now, what happens when strong emotions come up during a session? How do you, as the leader, deal with that?
Well, it depends a lot on the setting. If
Okay.
you're in an institutional environment like a hospital or a clinic, there are usually established protocols for dealing with those situations.
Right, you have support systems in place.
Exactly. But in a community setting, you might need to provide information about other resources, if someone needs ongoing support.
Referrals and things like that.
Yeah. But generally, you want the group experience to feel manageable and safe for everyone. And the handbook also mentions the importance of the cleanup process at the end.
Oh, interesting.
It sounds mundane, but it can actually be a really helpful way for people to wind down and reconnect with the group.
Like a grounding ritual.
Yeah. If everyone participates, it can contribute to that sense of cohesion, too.
We're all in this together. Now, one thing that stood out to me is that the handbook also talks about how the focus of the group can vary. It's not always about, deep emotional processing, is it?
Not at all.
Right.
For some groups, the art might be the main focus, especially for folks who have a hard time communicating verbally,
Right.
like individuals with intellectual disabilities or maybe some groups of children.
Okay.
For them, the art itself can be that primary means of connection and expression.
It's their language. And then you also have those groups where the social interaction is the main thing, right?
Exactly. Like groups for people who are socially isolated.
Yeah.
In those cases, the activities are chosen to spark conversations.
Yeah.
And you might even include breaks for tea or coffee, just to encourage that social interaction.
It's about building community. Now, the handbook also talks about how groups evolve over time, those stages of development. What are those?
So there are some typical stages that most groups go through.
Okay.
In the beginning, there's often a lot of dependence on the leader for structure and direction.
Right. Everyone's figuring things out.
Exactly. And then the group starts to find its feet.
Okay.
They establish their own norms, they clarify any misunderstandings, and sometimes the membership changes a bit as people figure out if it's the right group for them.
Natural attrition.
Right. And then as that trust builds and people start looking forward to the sessions, you enter a phase of greater cohesion.
The group is solidifying.
Yeah. And in that more cohesive environment, people often feel more comfortable sharing deeper parts of themselves, both through the art and in the discussions.
Because they feel safe.
Exactly. They feel safe enough to be vulnerable, to grapple with their challenges openly.
And that's where the real growth happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But of course, there can be problems along the way.
Oh, I'm sure.
Right.
The book gives some examples of, conflicts between co-leaders. What are some of those?
Well, sometimes one leader might take over, unintentionally dominate the space.
Right.
Or there might be some unresolved conflict between the leaders that ends up spilling over into the group.
Oh, that's not good.
No. So it's really important for co-leaders to communicate clearly and define their roles from the beginning.
To prevent those power struggles.
Right. And then you can also have those disruptive group members, which can be challenging.
What are some examples of that?
Oh, maybe someone talks excessively, or they're always late, or they keep bringing up personal problems that aren't really relevant to the group. And the book talks about how to handle those situations, setting boundaries, or in some cases, maybe even considering whether that person is actually benefiting from the group or if they're negatively impacting others.
So sometimes it's necessary to ask someone to leave.
Sometimes, yeah, it's not ideal,
Hmm.
but the well-being of the group as a whole is the priority.
Now, the group paintings themselves, those can be really revealing, can't they?
Oh, absolutely.
In what way?
When you do those collaborative art projects, they can sometimes shine a light on underlying tensions or conflicts in the group, things that weren't obvious before.
Interesting.
But that act of creating something together, that shared visual representation, it can also be a really powerful way to work through those issues.
Okay.
Even if people have some negative reactions to the artwork initially, it can ultimately lead to deeper understanding and connection.
It brings things to the surface.
Yes, and this is where choosing the right theme becomes so important.
Right, because some themes can be more triggering than others.
Exactly. You have to be sensitive to the group and really prepare carefully. The handbook gives examples where those important underlying messages were missed.
Oh, wow.
And it points out that often when people are feeling vulnerable, they'll raise their biggest concerns indirectly.
Like they're testing the waters.
Yeah, exactly. They're not always ready to come right out and say it. And the book also acknowledges that even experienced leaders make mistakes. Nobody's perfect.
Of course.
And it stresses the importance of reflecting on those challenging experiences, maybe talking them through with colleagues to learn and grow.
It's a continual learning process. Now, the book includes this fascinating case study of a group called the Friday Group. Can you tell us a bit about them?
So the Friday group was a community group with a really diverse mix of people.
Okay.
And the membership changed over time, which is pretty typical. In the beginning, their sessions were more focused on color exercises and those personal construct theories, which look at how people make sense of their world. But then the group actually asked to start exploring more of those art therapy themes.
Yeah, ready to go deeper.
Yeah. And the case study describes some of those specific themes they used. One was earliest childhood memory, which led one participant, Jenny, to create this really dark painting, mostly black, that expressed feelings of sadness and separation.
Wow.
Another theme was family clay sculpture, which brought up a whole range of interpretations about what family means. One member, Tamsin, actually had a really strong